Hi, River. You're going to see a tremendous testimony to follow from a man named Howie Close. He works in the prisons, in the prison ministry here at Ark Valley Correctional Facility here in Ordway. He specifically works for Woodman Valley Chapel, and they pay him to run a prison ministry, actually run a church campus inside Ark Valley. I'm excited that you're going to see this testimony today. We're going to pick it up about 2 minutes in, and so listen closely as Howie shares his testimony. Hope you'll be blessed like we were today. Thank you.
Was number 2, and I always tell people, like, my mom took one look at my brother and she's like, that's it, no more kids. He's not quite that ugly, but they had a boy and they had a girl, and the kind of the American dream, and so they're like, cool, we're done. And so my mom had this tiny little device implanted in her womb, in her uterus, called an IUD, an intrauterine device. Is a little white plastic crab-looking thing, and it was supposed to keep her from having any more children. It was a contraceptive. And shortly after that thing was surgically inserted, my mom conceived me. And the doctors said all the worst possible things. Basically, this device is going to turn this pregnancy into scrambled eggs. If he survives through pregnancy, through to term and is born, he'll be physically deformed, mentally deformed. He might live 10 or 12 years. They'll be very painful years, and then he'll be gone. The jury's still out on the mental part. But when I was born, ladies, if you don't mind, I was 10 pounds, 9 ounces. I was super heavy. In the one picture there, I'm the one in the middle laughing because I'm probably pinching my brother's neck really hard. And so that's why I'm laughing so big. But that's me as a toddler, probably pre-toddler. I was super healthy. That device was just laying on my face. They just took it off. They removed it. No scar. 10 pounds, 9 ounces. Go mom. She's a rock star. However, for my whole young life, I would be talking with these lawyers, and I would be signing papers. Even before I knew how to write, they were asking me to scribble on a piece of paper, and I had all of these doctors prodding me because my mom was involved in a class action lawsuit against the company that made this failed device, and it failed in a lot of other pregnancies, and those moms weren't as lucky, if you can call my mom lucky. She had 3 crazy kids, So my parents tried as best they could to make a tiny little mind understand what was going on. They called me a pleasant surprise. They loved me. I was the baby. I was almost certainly spoiled, treated better than the other 2. And yet the way I articulated that in my heart was that if they had their way, I wouldn't be here. They didn't want me. I was a mistake. I'm a mistake. It took me a lot of years to even figure that out. I mean, when I was a kid, I never said that out loud. But that's how I felt. And so that's how I lived. And because of how I felt about myself, that's how I treated other people. And all the doctors saying all those things about me and me reading them in paperwork and hearing that stuff said about me, like I knew I didn't have a right to life. I was supposed to live until I was 12 and then die. Like, those are the kind of things I heard growing up. And again, not my parents' fault, but that stuff was just said a lot about me. And so I internalized that, and I created this piece of me where I didn't have a death wish, but I was always just waiting to die. Death was around every corner. And so I had a very reckless young life. Everything I did was super high risk. I fell from 5 stories twice. I wrecked motorcycles. I was hit by a dump truck in Virginia. I was hit on a bicycle. I was riding a bicycle. Dump truck ran me over because I was playing in traffic. I got hit on my brother's bicycle that didn't have any brakes going down a big hill in North Carolina, and got hit by some poor lady in a car that I ran out in front of. I should have died so many times. and I'm scratching my way down a glass building. I quit school when I was 15, get to that in a minute, but my very first job was washing high-rise windows, and I'm sitting on a single rope wooden genie seat, 5 stories high. I refuse to wear a harness. I swing over. I hit my suction cup on a course of windows. The seat swings out from under me, and I go sliding down this building, 5 stories up. I should have been dead the whole way down, scratching against the glass. I'm talking to this person I didn't even believe in, this God I didn't even believe in. I'm like, oh, this is how you're going to do it. This is how it happens. This is how it ends. I wasn't going, oh no, or oh, whatever people might say in that instance. I was literally talking to the Creator I didn't even believe in, because I just knew my days were numbered, and eventually He was going to get me somehow. Flying over the handlebars of a motorcycle or a bicycle after a car had hit me, sliding down the pavement. Like, I'm always just having this conversation with God in the back of my head, like, this is how you're going to do it. I was always just kind of waiting for death. And behind all of that recklessness, there was violence. Extreme, ugly violence. The first instance of violence that I can remember, certainly not the first, but the first one I remember, I was on a playground in New Jersey, and this 8-year-old boy with red hair and freckles was on the swing next to me. And I said, "You're a turkey." And he said, "Your mama's a turkey." And I jumped off the swing, and I hit him so hard I heard his face crack. He fell down on the ground moaning, and I rolled him into a half-frozen lake. I was 6. And there would be so many times, countless times over the years, some poor dad would be on my front porch with his son in some sort of cast or contraption, telling my dad, "You owe me medical bills for what your kid did to my kid." I wasn't a bully. I didn't pick on people smaller than me or younger than me. I always fought kids older than me and bigger than me. Usually they were the bullies. And my parents cheered me on. They thought it was cool that I could beat up kids bigger than me. And at some point along the way, some genius thought it would be a good idea to get me involved in martial arts. I think they thought like the discipline and all that would send my energy in a good direction. What actually happened was the karate teachers helped me be better at, more efficient at doing what I loved doing, and that was hurting people. And the reason I liked hurting people is because I was indifferent. I didn't hate you, and I didn't love you. I just didn't care, and that's worse. Indifference is way worse. I would rather someone hate me. At least they're expending some energy, emotional energy in my way. I'm at least worth hate. But when you don't care about another person's existence, you're a sociopath and you're a problem. You're a bigger problem to society than I ever realized. And so that's who I was. And I just didn't care. I loved hurting people. I loved it when they were bigger than me. I loved it when they thought they were tougher than me. I so enjoyed it. By the time I was 17, I was a semi-pro kickboxer. I fought in and out of the ring. Fighting was my life. I ate it, I drank it, I breathed it. You're looking at my face right now and you're going, no way this guy was a fighter. His nose is still straight. His teeth are all original. Thank Jesus. I just didn't really like getting hit, so I didn't get hit a lot. But I fought a lot. When I was 17, I came to Colorado because of some family issues in Florida. Orlando was always home. I know you heard me say a lot of different places. Orlando was always home, born and raised there. We'd move away for a little while, but we'd always come back to Florida. And I moved away for a little while, what I thought would be a little while. And for those of us who know, sometimes we say you come for the snow and you stay on parole, or you come on vacation and you stay on probation. I came to visit my mom and my brother. My mom and dad split up when I was 14 and really started to get in trouble then because I didn't have any real supervision. But came here when I was 17. I was here 2 months, and I picked a fight in Denver, Colorado with 6 Japanese exchange students. 2 weeks after Colorado passed their brand new hate crime law. I was 17. The fight lasted about 90 seconds. 6 victims had cuts and bruises, not even a broken bone. I'm not saying when I say not even, I don't mean to mitigate what I did. I was wrong and I deserve to be punished. But they used this brand new hate crime legislation. I'm poor and I'm white and I'm from the South. These guys are rich and not white. And it just was the perfect scenario for them to really make something of this. So we were in the paper quite a bit. There was me and 2 other people. I was the first person to be tried and convicted of the hate crime in Colorado. So for that street fight when I was a teenager, it was a brawl, pretty much, 75 years. I was sentenced to 75 years in prison. I was supposed to die in prison. So here I am, a teenager in the Denver County Jail. I turned 18 and 19 in the Denver County Jail awaiting my trial and my sentence. And I'm a child. I weighed, why don't you go to the next picture? We'll just show them that. That's me in Lyman at 19. I weighed 165 pounds. I was 2 inches shorter than I am now. And prior to that even, I was in the Denver County Jail with a bunch of pretty much accomplished criminals, monsters, some people would say. And one of the predators in the Denver County Jail, the staff knew he was a predator and he liked to prey on young little white guys, came into my cell. And I hurt him really, really badly. And they put me in segregation in a solitary confinement cell. Inmates call that place the Hole. And in the Denver County Jail, they have a special name for the segregation cells in Denver County. The inmates not so affectionately refer to it as the dark side. Ironically enough, not because it's dark. There's a fluorescent light that stays on 24 hours a day. It never goes off. It was always super cold in there. The reason they called it the dark side is because there were 2 doors that separated you from the hallway outside. And you never had contact with a human being in there. It's the dark side of the moon. You lose contact, right? And so we called it the dark side of the moon because you just didn't see or talk to another person a couple times a day. A tray slot would open up. Tray would get pushed under, sort of kind of like you see in the movies, and then they close the slot and that was it. And when they take a guy out of one of those cells, they intentionally clean it out, everything that's in there, they completely sanitize that cell. Because when they put the new guy in, they're not sure if there's going to be anything in there that he can use to hurt himself or to hurt other people. So they take everything out, and then when they realize you're going to be okay, they start giving you a mattress, they give you a sheet, they give you these things when they realize you're going to be all right. And before they put me in there, they drugged me out of that cell, covered in blood. They took me down to medical and they cleaned me up and none of the blood was mine. They came in there expecting to see a different scenario because they knew the potential of this other guy. So they came in to rescue me. They did. They drugged me out, took me down to medical, cleaned me up. And then I sat there for a while, for about a half an hour. And this old captain comes down, and he kind of was the captain of the jail. Bald head, big guy. And he sits down next to me, and I was a good criminal. You don't talk to the cops, right? So we sat there for what seemed like a long time, probably about 3 minutes. Nobody said a word. He didn't say anything to me. I didn't say anything to him. When he finally spoke, he looked at me and he said, "What are you?" He said, "What are you?" I just shrugged my shoulders. Don't talk to the cops. It wouldn't have mattered. I didn't have an answer. I'm a mistake. That's what I am. I don't know. What are you? So they put me in this cell. Stainless steel bunk, stainless steel toilet, everything else is concrete, and I'm sitting there and I'm sitting on the edge of the bunk and I'm looking around surveying my new digs, and listen, I'm not throwing a pity party. I earned my way into that place. I wasn't sad. I didn't want to be there. I mean, let's be honest, I didn't want to be there, but I wasn't throwing a pity party, and I'm looking around and I'm like, this is right. This is where you deposit mistakes. This is where I belong. I earned it. And out of the corner of my eye, something kind of caught my attention. It was stuffed underneath, way back underneath the toilet. They had missed something, and I go over and I grab it. It's a book. It's an old, beat up, ripped up, tattered book. It didn't have a cover on it or anything. And I grabbed it, and out of curiosity, I looked at it, and it was a Bible. I didn't have much use for that, but there wasn't anything else in there but me and concrete and steel, so out of sheer boredom, I just started reading it. The 4 months that I was in that cell, I read that thing, I don't know how many times, non-cover to non-cover. I just read that Bible. And something happened to me. There was no shining light, there was no crack in the clouds, there was no voice from the sky, but reading the Word of God over and over and over again, something happened. And I came out of there and I didn't want to hurt people anymore. And I tell people, I really truly believe in those moments that the light found me on the dark side. There was a song we sang earlier about God running after us. People ask me all the time, did you find God in prison? I say, no, God wasn't lost. I was. He found me in prison. The light found me on the dark side. In my darkest moment, when I didn't even realize it was my darkest moment, God came to me in the form of a beat up Bible that they missed. And these guys don't miss stuff, because when you miss stuff, people get hurt. God put a Bible in my path to change my life, and I would love to tell you that I got out of segregation, they found me not guilty, and I got to go home. But you can tell by those pictures, that wasn't the truth. I got a 75-year, shortly after that stint in the hole, I got a 75-year prison term. And I went to the most violent prison in the state, because that's where they send violent thugs who get 75-year prison terms. Back then, it's pretty much the only place they had for us. Lyman had barely been open a year, and it already had the reputation of being the most violent prison in the state. I was 2 months past my 19th birthday, and I was scared. Problem is, most people get scared. That means something to each individual a little differently. For me, when I get scared, other people get hurt. Because that's how I work my fear out, is I confront it, and usually it's not good. My wife would testify that even today, without physical violence, that might sometimes still be true. Yeah. So there's this scary place, and I got to figure out how to do time here, and I hadn't really read that Bible enough or walked with God enough to know that He could really protect me in that scary place, but I knew that I could protect myself. So I put the Bible down. And to my shame, for the next 5 years, I lived like an animal. And I fit in at Lyman really, really well. The cops hated me, and I loved it. The first guy that heart checked me, that's what I looked like, guys. I looked like a college student walking into Animal House, a monster factory. And they're like, oh, look at this one. He's young, he's white, he's not ugly. We got us one. The first guy that came at me, I put him in the hospital. The second one, they had to fight for life out. And then this rumor started going around the prison. I have actually overheard a guy talking about this in the chow hall. Yeah, you want to leave that little white boy alone, he'll do you harm. And I smashed out a reputation and existence for myself. And then in 1996, the Lord in His infinite wisdom, or the Department of Corrections in their infinite wisdom, they had an overcrowding problem in Colorado in the 90s. We went from, when I got arrested, we had 12 prisons in Colorado. By the end of the decade, 10 years later, we had 43. Our prison population in Colorado quadrupled in 10 years. almost quadrupled in 10 years. And even then, they had an overcrowding problem, so they were sending Colorado inmates to other states, Texas, Minnesota, all of these great vacation destinations. And one day, I get a thing that slides on. By the way, Colorado was sending all of their troubled inmates to these places. They're troublemakers. So I get a bag that's slid under the door, a piece of paper's taped to it, and it says, if any of y'all are from Texas, please forgive me. The piece of paper has big black letters on it, and it says BEXAR. Somebody younger than 18, tell me what that says. Ah, you're from Texas, dude. Hush now, hush. He said Bexar County. People in Texas spell bear BEXAR. Bexar. So this bag comes under my door, and it says Bexar. And I look up at the cop and I'm like, what's a Bexar? He says, just pack your stuff, dude. And I'm like, why? Where am I going? Where's Bexar? He says, it's Texas. And I'm like, oh no. Bexar County Jail, San Antonio, Texas, 7 stories tall. I was kidnapped. Literally kidnapped, put in chains, stuffed in a van, driven to the airport, put on a plane. The very first time I'd ever flown on a plane was in Con Air, literally in chains, miserable, snatched away from my brother and my mom and my family and my friends, and taken to Bexar. Ironically enough, for 4 months. And they moved me into this cell with another Colorado inmate. Most of the Bexar County Jail is full of Bexar County Jail inmates, Texas inmates waiting for trial. They put about 70-man pods. Mexican Mafia runs the whole jail. If you know about San Antonio, you probably know a little bit something about that. But they put us in these cells, or they put us in these pods with 70 other guys, basically, and there were like 5, 6, 7, 8 of us, depending on where we were at. And they moved me into a cell, ironically enough, with another Colorado inmate who had been doing time at Buena Vista, and I had never met him before. I come to find out his name was Josh, but he was sleeping. And so inmates, convicts, we kind of have this respect thing we do. We like to try to respect each other until you make us mad, and then we try to cut your heart out. But he was sleeping, so I took my prison luggage, which was a black plastic bag that still had the tag on it, to identify where I was at. I had no clue. I put that in the cell, and I just let him kind of get himself together. So I'm out in the pod, and I'm talking, and as a lost person, I had a very big mouth, I had a very loud mouth, and I had a horrible vocabulary. And so I was out kind of establishing the pecking order, which everywhere I live, pretty much I'm going to be at the top or I'm going to be dead. Because I don't like being afraid. I don't like looking over my shoulder. So if I'm going to have to do that, somebody's got to go. I wasn't being mean about it, but I was just establishing with the other guys in the pod who I was and where I come from and those kinds of things. And Josh was getting himself together, brushing his teeth. I saw the light come on. After a while, I went back in to unpack my luggage. And because of the kidnap situation, anything that connected me to home that they let me take, I took. And I had this little black leather Schofield study Bible that a friend had given me in the Denver County Jail, and I brought it with me, and I wasn't living it, I wasn't reading it, wasn't studying it, certainly. But I took it because it was a piece of home. And so I'm unpacking, and I throw that thing up on the desk. Josh is laying on the bed with a Bible, and I didn't know it at the time, but an Experiencing God workbook. So he's working through his Bible. I throw my Bible, I threw a Bible up on the desk, and he's like, "Hey man, cool Bible." And I'm like, "Yeah, I'm a Christian too." I just assumed he was one because he was reading his Bible, and he looked at me and he said, "I can't tell." Any other time and space, I slap all the teeth out of his mouth. "You don't know me, guy. Who do you think you're talking to?" But in that time and space, God broke my heart. Josh McKenzie, 88553. He's out now. He lives in Burlington. I think that's like northeast of here, still east and still in Colorado. I can't tell. I can't tell that you're a Christian. I heard you talking out there. I never heard no Christians talk like that. He didn't say any of those things. He just said, I can't tell. Those 3 words broke my heart. And honestly, in the most imperfect ways you'd ever want to see a Christian try to live, from that moment on, I've been trying to live so people could tell that I love Jesus. And Josh and I spent 4 months there together, learning, because he was very new to this too, learning and growing together. And then they send me on a plane back to Colorado. And I go right back to Lyman, and all of my friends were killers. And I got to tell every single one of them, I'm not carrying a knife in my sock. I'm going to walk out of my cell every day thinking, who do I got to kill today because they disrespected me? I'm not living this way anymore. I'm going to go do this Jesus thing. And y'all can do whatever you're going to do, but I'm going to do this. And God honored that decision, and to the man, every single one of those guys, and I'm not talking about killers in a euphemistic type of way, in an allegorical. These guys have killed people. Outside and inside, they were monsters. And they were my buddies, and they loved me because I was a monster. And I told them I'm not going to live this way anymore. And every one of them, to the man, said, show you right. Go do what you got to do. We honor your decision. God opened that door for me to be able to be in a church and to be a Christian. And I don't really do anything halfway. So I poured myself into that, and I started to learn, and I was a voracious reader, and I read every book I could get my hands on, and I read and I read and I read and I learned and I learned. And one of the fun pastimes Christian convicts have is arguing with each other about the Bible. You're wrong, I'm right. And my best friend at the time was Trevor Jones. By the way, Josh went back on the same plane I went back on, but he went back to Buena Vista and I went back to Lyman. So we didn't see each other for a long time after that. But my new friend was Trevor Jones. And Trevor and I, 94235, he may not ever get out. He and I would argue. We still do. Even though I'm a pastor, you think that would mean something to him, right? Nah. But we were arguing over a particular theological perspective. In it, I was in one camp and he was in another, and we were arguing about God's sovereignty and the church and premillennial versus reformed and all these different things we were talking about. And one day we're sitting in the chow hall, and he says something to me he said millions of times before, and I never listened because he was wrong. Maybe it was the prison cheeseburger I was eating, but he said, it's one tree. It's one tree, dude. It's one tree. And he was referencing that passage where the Apostle Paul talks about how Israel was the one tree and they rebelled against God, so God tore off that rebellious branch and he grafted the Gentiles in. And some people believe that Israel is one church and the Gentiles are a separate church. That's where I kind of believed in that moment. And Trevor was trying to teach me, show me, argue with me that no, it's one tree, it's one church. There are no A-class and B-class, second-class citizens in the kingdom of heaven. We either all love Jesus or we don't. Okay. I walked back to the cell very quietly after lunch, thinking to myself, I'm going to go and I'm going to get into this book. And I am going to research and I am going to study and I am going to once and for all finally prove that dude wrong. You're supposed to laugh. It's not a joke. It's true. That's exactly what I was thinking, but you should laugh because it was a bit silly for me to think that way. But I'm going to do it. And so I went to the passage where Paul's talking about the one tree, and I had a study Bible at the time with the references in it, and that passage kind of had some references that took me over to another passage, and then it took me over to another passage. And the third or fourth place where I landed was here. Because you see, in the county jail, when the light found me on the dark side, I still had a ton of baggage that I carried into my relationship with Jesus. And because I wasn't really walking the walk, it took a really long time for me to figure out a lot of the stuff I was still carrying was still in there and still dominating me. And I had read this passage so many times, and it never dawned on me. But that day, arguing with Trevor, trying to figure out a once and for all, ironclad, whoop this dude so he never gets up and wants to box again, argument against his position, God brings me here, and I read this sitting on my bed in a cell at Lyman, Colorado. For you formed my inward parts. You knitted me together in my mother's womb. I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, and my soul knows it very well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth. Your eyes saw my unformed substance. You could insert right there, he was specifically crafting me right around that stupid little device. In your book were written, every one of them, the days that were formed for me, when yet none of them existed. How precious to me are your thoughts, O God. How vast is the sum of them. I don't know why God picked that day. Never argued with Trevor about that topic again, by the way, but he was right, I was wrong. But in that moment, crying over that passage, I realized in an instant I'm not a mistake. I'm intentional. I was meant to be. And while I'm waiting to die, thinking around every corner is my death sentence, God's up there with every single one of my days already written in a book. Today, in Ordway, Colorado, always written in his book. His ways are wonderful to me because I'm clawing a glass wall thinking I'm falling to my death. And he sees Ordway, Colorado in 2021. What? So I just want to, here's the preaching part. I just want to talk to you a little bit about this. I just want to break it down for you because I wonder a lot. Maybe the expressions of how you feel about yourself don't work themselves out the way my expressions did, but I wonder a lot if people don't feel the same way for whatever reasons. Maybe it wasn't a little plastic crab and some lawsuits that made you feel this way, but I wonder if you think about your existence and wonder if it's all been just a big joke, if it's a mistake. What am I doing here? What's the point? All of those big, huge questions about life, they all fit right here. In verse 13, the psalmist, under the inspiration of the Holy Spirit of God, tells Howie Close in 1997 in Lyman, Colorado, in a prison cell, I formed you right around that piece of plastic. It never could have touched you. In verse 14, he tells me, and he tells you, he doesn't just create us, but he declares in that creation that each one of us are special. Do you see it there? I praise you, for I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Who was fearful? Have you ever thought about that? Was I fearful? Was God? I think what it means there is, if you take a deep look at it, it means careful. Have you ever thought about yourself that way? God took special care, almost to the point of being afraid he would screw up if he wasn't super careful, to make you just the way you are. The pigment of your skin, the size of your nose, the space between your eyes, the texture of your hair. Guys, for some of you, the lack thereof. Sorry. I saw a bald guy over here and I couldn't resist. You're special. You're not special because you're special. You're special because the one who took all that special care to create you is the infinite God of the universe. And he didn't make you this way to punish you. He made you this way because he loves you. And because you have a job to do in your specialness that none of the rest of us can do. You're special. Do you feel that way? If you don't, that's a lack of faith in God, and God says anything that's outside of faith is sin. Please stop sinning. Please see yourselves the way God sees you. He put so much work into you. And you look in the mirror and you see a piece of crap. Or you see a mistake. And it's got to break his heart. It's got to break his heart. And then the last thing I just want to say about this is, and I think this is more important than just about anything, is every single one of your days are marked out for you. I don't know how it is down here, but in North Colorado Springs, we've got kids killing themselves. They're affluent. They go to great schools. Their parents have tons of money. They have the latest iPhone. And they're checking out on life. What do they see and think and feel when they look in the mirror? Not special. Not the wonderfulness of God's hands in creating them. I don't know what it is, but they're not seeing that. Every single one of your days are marked out. God has them planned. And I guarantee you, for a lot of you, especially you youngsters in the room that have maybe checked out on me a long time ago, I should get a little bell, ding, ding, so you can, oh, he's talking to us now. You got a long way to go. And it's going to be amazing. And I'm not just saying that because I had an amazing ride. I had a super painful, ugly ride. I know what human brains smell like. And we don't talk about it much, but I wake up sometimes sobbing. But I know I'm special because God created me, and He meant for today to happen, and nothing was going to get in the way of that. Not my own ridiculousness, not my violence, not the prison system. And here's the thing, that baggage I was carrying around that I refused to let go of, when I finally set it down, that's not heavy enough. It was way heavier than that. When I set it down and when I turned from it and I started to trust God to take care of that for me, He brought me so many blessings. And the first one He brought me was this: a family. A friend of mine at Lyman lied to me. And his significant other that lived in Colorado Springs lied to her friend and said the others were looking for a pen pal just to write to about Jesus, which was, we weren't. I didn't ask him for that, and Susan certainly didn't ask Teresa for that. People ask me all the time, how'd you guys meet? And I'm like, she was trolling the prisons looking for dudes. Not true. But Rick convinced me that she just was looking for someone to write to about Jesus. And I like to talk about Jesus, so I wrote her a letter. And inadvertently, it just happened to be the time of the year that it was. She got my letter on February 14th, 1997. And she read it. And listen, y'all can talk to her after service. This is probably the one heavy negative in her column. Because here's the thing. So I got out of prison many, many years later, and I'll tell you all that in a minute, but I got to tell you the years because she'll get mad at me. 14 years, 1 month, 14 days is how long we were together before I ended up getting out of prison. But I get out, and we're sitting on the couch, and we kept all of our letters. So we dug through this big old box of letters, and we found the very first letter I ever wrote her. We both sat on the couch, and we quietly read it, and she's a faster reader than me, so she was done waiting impatiently for me to finish. She flipped it over. I'm like, wait, I'm not done with the front. So we read the letter, we get to the end, and I look over at her, and I'm like, why in the world did you ever write me back? She's like, I don't know. You know how you grow a little bit, and then you look back on some earlier things you did, and you're like, wow, like maybe some of you teenagers are looking back to like when you were 8 and you drew that picture with crayons, and you're like, that was rudimentary. My letter was very rudimentary. And we started a little family. That booger there is Chelsea. She was barely 4 years old when I met her. She's never known a time when I wasn't her dad. She's 27 now. She's a school teacher, an elementary school teacher in Denver, and she's everything I want to be when I grow up. And then some other things that happened was just growing in faith. You guys can flip the screen. There's a bunch of pictures that in any other kind of program they would have kind of slid in there, but basically I just started living, and I started exploring what life could be without that baggage of being a mistake. I'm intentional. And if I'm intentional, that means still in prison with a 75-year prison term, I have work to do. And that was one of the major things that came out of that little work that God did with me in the cell that day. Was I didn't know what my purpose was that day, but I knew I had one for the first time in my life. My purpose wasn't to die. My purpose was to live. And so I started living, and I became a leader in the church, and I started creating relationships, and I started to try to surround myself with community and be a teacher and to be a learner. God gave me a life of meaning and purpose even inside a really horrible, ugly place. And then one day, I guess the next slide will probably do the same thing. Let's see, it didn't. There's a few different pictures in there. One of them is a picture of our daughter pointing at the clock that says 8:11 a.m. and she's got a boo-boo face because I was supposed to get out at 8 o'clock. They were supposed to let me go at 8, and it was 8:11, and they weren't real happy about that. But after 20 years and 5 months, the Supreme Court of Colorado gave me a mercy ruling and reduced my sentence to 30 years. And with my earned time and good time, I had already done 27 years of a 30-year sentence, so they released me on my very first parole hearing. And that's me standing outside the parole office talking on my very first cell phone. Some of you, I'm looking in the back and I see some youngsters, you probably all have cell phones, yes? It's okay, you can shake your heads. Yeah, thank you, he held his up. I got 3, I wish I could give them all 3 to y'all, and then you'd never want a cell phone again in your life, promise you, because the people who call me, woo. So I'm talking, when I went to prison, there was no such thing as a cell phone. They did have one, but it was like a big, huge brick-looking thing. Remember those old people? Remember those? And so they, well, yeah, because if you're too young, who remembers the brick? Like you've actually, those are the old people in your church, young people. If you didn't raise your hand, you're young. And that's what they had. The internet was actually called the World Wide Web, and the military used it. It wasn't even a thing. There was personal computers, laptops, forget about it. That stuff didn't exist. So 2 decades later, y'all ain't even 2 decades old yet, I get out and she hands me a cell phone. And I'm like, yippee. And it was actually kind of sort of a dumb phone. It's the one that, you remember the one with the keyboard that slid out from underneath? And it was like an idiot savant phone. It had a touch screen, so it was kind of smart, but not really. And so that's just pictures of me getting out of prison the day I got out of prison. And then shortly after that, so we were married on paper in prison because we didn't know how long it was going to be. We both talked a lot. Like I tried to get rid of her a couple times and she wouldn't go. I'd laugh at that with you, but it wasn't funny because I really did try because it was really super painful for both of us. It was a blessing, but it was painful. Some of you know what I'm talking about. And the one thing we knew is this was God's plan for us. And so we tried to live that out, and we were never able to have an actual ceremony. So when I got out, we had a ceremony at Woodman. My head pastor, who really didn't marry people, because if he opened that door, everybody would want to be married by the head pastor, but he was a very good friend of mine. He actually stood in my cell at Territorial, looking at all my books. And the white-haired guy next to him, you're going to see him a little bit later too. His name's Dan Matchey. He was the chaplain at Territorial. He walked me out of the gate and handed me off to my wife and my daughter. And so we had an amazing, beautiful ceremony there, and we did that a week after we got out because we thought if we didn't do it quicker, life would take over and we wouldn't do it. And then immediately after I got out, I petitioned the Department of Corrections to let me back in. I'm an offender. I'm a violent offender, 22 violent felonies. 6 of them are in the homicide category, attempted manslaughter. I'm still on parole, and I'm asking the Department of Corrections to break every rule in the book, because people like me do not go back into prison as volunteers. The only way we go back into prison is in shackles. And I asked them to let me do that. And it just so happens the Lord worked it out, kind of one of those, I got all of your days marked in my, those are all in the book. The executive director at the time, Tom Clements, who became a very, very dear friend of mine, actually went to our church. And here I am in a room with him and all of his top officials for the state, parole, DOC, and I'm asking them to break every rule they have on the books for people like me. And he's like, yeah, let's try it. And I'm like, what? I didn't actually think this would work. I thought I was going to have to go be an electrician or something. Dig ditches, something, wait tables, I don't know. Would you like cheese with your fries? I don't know. Is that tables or is that McDonald's? I don't know. Anyway, so God started to do really, truly the unimaginable in my life, and I start going back into prison. And again, these pictures aren't going to roll, but Trevor Jones is in one of those pictures behind that front one. I've literally got a couple photos up there of me standing up in front of a group of people just like this, pointing, and the group of people are all DOC executives. I wasn't really telling them anything. It's just the way the picture got taken. I happened to be pointing in that moment. I wasn't telling them anything super important. I was just kind of explaining the ministry that we hope to have. And before long, I was actually under contract with the DOC. That picture you see there with staff, I was going around the state, and I had an actual training session at the academy in Canyon City where I was training staff. I was 15 years old when I dropped out of school. I got my GED in the Denver County Jail when I was 17. I'm a violent criminal who should have died in prison, and I'm teaching staff for the Department of Corrections in Colorado. Just mind-blowing. The guy sitting next to me, if any of you are familiar with the DOC, you'll know that that's Lou Archuleta, and he was a pretty cool guy. God started to lay out this purpose for me. Remember, I didn't know what my purpose was. I just knew I had one. He started to show it to me, and I started to live it out. But we also had fun with it, too. If you guys will so we have a party at my house every year. When the kids come for Easter, that's who gives them candy. We could really struggle over the hard thing. I mean, prison was hard, y'all. It's easy to stand up here and talk about it for a few minutes and go away and go, wow, cool story. Every time I do this, I'll give you a pro tip so you don't have to do this to me today, but everyone will come up to the front and they'll be like, wow, man, that's a great story. And I'm like, yeah, try living it. It wasn't great. It was 20 years of hell. And God was there with me. And now that I'm out, we celebrate what he put me through, because that was still part of the crafting that carefully and wonderfully made. Prison was part of making me who he needed me to be here today, and to be in Ark Valley, and to have the experiences I get to have out there. So we celebrate our life, even the messy bits. And we kind of have fun with it. 4 years ago, Go ahead, ladies. 4 years ago, the Department of Corrections approached me and said, would you want to work for us? And I'm like, I didn't even know that was possible. Like, doesn't that break the law? You can't hire felons. You're a state agency. They're like, no, the law was changed. We can. And I'm like, well, you can't afford me. And here's the truth. I didn't want to work for the DOC because I didn't want to have to obey the rules. I got to break every rule, y'all. Like, I was in a really sweet spot. I had access to every prison in the state. I was training staff. I was doing crazy stuff. And they're like, you want to work for us? Nope. Didn't even have to think about it. You know how like really thoughtful pastor types will always say, let me pray about that and I'll get back to you. Nope. Didn't even have to pray about it. Like, not doing it. And I said, but I have an alternative. How about you give me the badge anyway? Give me the keys, give me the access, and the church can just keep paying me because they pay me to do prison stuff anyway. And they're like, that works. So they got me for free. And I literally carry keys to the prisons that held me captive. I'm the first offender in the state to be tried and convicted of the hate crime. I'm the first offender in the state to be allowed to go back into prison as a volunteer while still on parole. After that, they changed the rules, and I have taken dozens of parolees and halfway house clients back into prison to talk and encourage other prisoners. Now it's commonplace to do that all over the state. And I'm the only offender in the state's history so far to literally carry keys. When these guys saw me for lunch 2 days ago, I had my badge on and I had my keys to that prison, every door in the prison. Maybe that doesn't resonate super deep with you, but try living in one of those places as a resident for 20 years and then get out and they hand you a set of keys and say, come on back in. And then 2.5 years ago, we started this amazing campus at Arkansas Valley Correctional Facility. And if you'll put that one up. Woodman asked me to be part of that. And if you look up there, there is a beautiful looking gentleman standing next to Levi. That guy's name is Rydale Dotson. He's a dear friend of mine. The man in the tub was a friend of mine when we were at Lyman together as inmates, and I got to baptize him. And that's our church. And if you've never seen a prison church, you just look at those pictures and you go, wow, that just looks like a big room with a bunch of people sitting there. Hello. If I had a mirror. It's just a big room with people sitting here. What is similar? The rooms are similar. The chairs might be similar. The fact that we're all sinners in need of a graceful and forgiving God is similar. What's not similar is a lot of you haven't done the things that they've done. Thank God that you haven't. I go back in and I carry both IDs. In my wallet, I have that inmate ID that you saw in the very beginning, and I have, obviously, my staff ID hanging from my belt. And I hold both of those up regularly and I show them to people because in man's world, those two documents are impossible for the same person to carry. But we serve the God of the impossible. We serve a God who makes the impossible things possible. He takes mistakes and he turns them into intentional, purposeful people that get to do ridiculous, crazy stuff. And your ridiculous, crazy stuff may not be going into prison, and I totally get that. I really do. Like, I'm a special kind of crazy. I get it. And you'll leave out of here and you'll go, that dude's a special kind of crazy. Okay, you're not even going to get an argument out of me. Yeah, they made really bad mistakes and they hurt people. And I love them. And I guess that makes me sort of twisted, but someone has to. And God created me specially to love them. And they're my friends. And Rydale's, I asked him for permission to tell you this. His brother just died. And they were like best friends. His brother wasn't in prison. He just was a normal person out in the free world. And his brother died and he couldn't go to the funeral. And he's hurting, and they haven't even seen people in a year because of COVID. We haven't been able to worship with them. They haven't seen their families. It's very easy for us to label people monsters or animals. Because when we do that, then we can treat them any way we want. We can think about them any way we want. We can feel about them any way we want. That's what we did in slavery days. If they're less than, if they're not completely equal to us, then we can do what we want. We can even write it into law and make it legal that we treat people this way. They've done bad things, but they're not animals. And at the end of the day, no matter how bad their stuff is, they're fearfully and wonderfully made by the same guy who fearfully and wonderfully made you. And they need Jesus. And so that's why we do the work we do, never forgetting the damage done and the people that they damaged who also need Jesus. So I'm just wondering if you feel intentional this morning. I got one more little story to share with you, and then I'm going to shut up because I know some of you are like, wow, this guy, the slides never end. So here's what happened last night. I just want to tell you a quick story. It's hard to see. Stages at the bottom. This is our church at Woodman Valley Chapel last night. That's a picture of our screen in the background. And in the tub with Chaplain Dan and I, my chaplain from Territorial, who now actually works for me. A lot of people who were doing prison ministry when I was still an inmate now work for me, and they'll tell you always want to be nice to people because you never know when they're going to end up being your boss. Chaplain Dan and I are in the tub with a guy, and his name is Tracy, and he also gave me permission to tell you this. He was in the federal prison system for 25 years. 15 of those years at the ADX Federal Supermax in Florence. Supermax is where they put all the bombers, all the nasty people. Ted Kaczynski, the Unabomber, Eric Rudolph, the Atlanta bomber, all of these guys, the Muslim terrorists, all of these really nasty dudes end up there for their crime. Tracy didn't end up there for his crime. He was part of the Aryan Brotherhood in the federal prison system. And he created his own offshoot called SAC and was the leader of that for many, many years. Stabbed more than 5 people, 5 that they know of. And he worked his way up to the federal Supermax with violence and operating this criminal organization, this racist organization inside the prison. Sweet little Chaplain Dan and I got the opportunity to teach a class inside the federal ADX. We're contract volunteers with them, and we get to go in and teach this class. And Dan led Tracy to the Lord. And now Tracy's out. He lives in Colorado Springs with his wife. He's only been out a very short time. And he loves Jesus. And we got to baptize him last night. He's got this big, huge swastika on his neck. This was an ugly human being. If you Google his name, you'd be offended and want to throw up at what Google would have to tell you about this man. And last night he stood in that tub and he looked at his mom and he said, I love you so much and I love Jesus. And he cried. And we cried. We were all like 3 big babies in there. And that's the monster. So easy to make him a monster. And he's just a son with a mama who loves him and was praying for him the whole time. And Jesus answered her prayers. And we got to do that last night. Is there one more? Jeremy, he was the other one we baptized last night. Y'all, he was in the state system. He's got an upside down cross right on his forehead. He's been a greeter for the last 4 or 5 months. He's been a greeter at Woodman Valley Chapel. So standing out front of our doors with a lanyard on that says, here to serve. My name's Jeremy. And he's going to hand you a bulletin. He's like, hey, welcome to Woodman. Boom, bam. Ooh, just right there, upside down cross. Like add a couple lines and you got Charlie Manson. And he also likes weights. So he's like a little bulldog. His waist is this big, but his shoulders are like bowling balls. And he just, welcome to Woodman. He doesn't talk like that. He's a sweetheart of a guy. These guys did ugly stuff and they're like, what would make you put that? Where was he at? The depths of the depravity in his heart, the stuff he was feeling about himself that he would put that thing on his face. What was he going through? Doesn't matter because he loves Jesus and Jesus loves him. And he's fearfully and wonderfully made. And we got to tell the world about that last night, and I get to tell Ordway about it this morning. Not every one of these guys is going to get out. Not every one of them deserves to. Everyone, no matter where we're at, deserves Jesus. And that's kind of my purpose. That's my intention. And I thank you guys so much for letting me be a part of it. Can I pray for you? Father, thank you for these people. Thank you for their hearts to welcome me into their house. I'm thankful, God, that you fearfully and wonderfully made a prison in their backyard. For many, it's an issue, it's a negative issue. Prison was a negative issue for me too. God, I just pray that you would move these people to love well, to see lives changed through your Son, Jesus Christ. Motivate them to continue to do that because they're already doing it. Be their God today, God. Show up in a wonderful and a fearful way. Show them their purpose. For the young ones that can hear my voice, God, some of them maybe don't get it. Maybe they don't get me. That's okay. God, I just pray that they'll get you. You could do it, and we trust you with it. In Christ's name, for your glory. Amen.
Who am I that the highest King would welcome me? I was lost, but he brought me his love for me. Oh, his love for me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, he's free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am.
Are you free today?
Free at last, he has ransomed me. His grace runs deep. While I was a slave to sin, Jesus died for me. Yes, he died for me. Whom the Son sets free, oh, he's free. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Hey, listen to this. In my Father's house, 'cause he made you, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God, yes I am. Right here, listen to this, right here. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. Who did they say you are? He's for you. He's not against you. Here's what it says. I am who you say I am. Not a mistake. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. Sing it out. You are for me, not against me. Here we go. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Whom the Son sets free, oh, he's free indeed. I'm a child of God, yes I am. In my Father's There's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. In my Father's house, there's a place for me. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. Hey, so y'all kind of know how this goes around here. Y'all know that I can't sing and preach at the same time either. Can't play my guitar. So this is how this goes. We've made a sacrifice in the last year to split our congregation. And there's half of them waiting to worship in La Junta right now. But the Lord's done some business in here today, and I about hadn't made it through this song without praying. Because he was in a house for a while. And somebody held the keys to that house, and they needed to hold the keys to that house, and he needed to be in that house. And then whether he's in that house or he's not in that house, what he's saying is, there's a bigger guy in a bigger house that holds bigger keys. And what separates us from getting into that house is our own sin. And what keeps us in bondage and keeps us captives of our own sinfulness. His sin, my sin, your sin. It's sin. Yeah, there's categories because there's consequences. And his had greater consequences. It needed to. You've never heard him say any different all day. The fact is, his sin and your sin and my sin will keep us out of the Father's house. But where people were injured and hurt by his hands and others' hands, the Son of God laid himself before mankind and let himself be injured and hurt so that that guy and this guy and you can be forgiven. That's the gospel. Where we deserve it, he took it. I think we need to do some business today. I'm going to stay. Howie's got to go. That's what's going to have to happen here. He's going to have to go. Maybe we'll get him back where we can spend an evening, hours together. I don't know how that's going to go. There's some of you that I've asked to be here for prayer over the weeks and months and years that we've been around. I need you up here right now. Y'all need to come up here. If you're willing to pray with people, you know who you are. If I've asked you, get up here. And we're going to spend some time. If you need prayer, we're going to pray with you. Howie's probably got about 2 minutes, and then we're just going to have to be generous, and we're going to have to let him go. But don't leave here if the Lord's doing something in your heart. Don't leave here if he left a Bible behind a toilet. Don't leave here today if he left a who in your cell that said, I can't tell, what's his name? Don't leave here if he left a Howie that's really a Josh and said, man, I can't tell if you're a Christian. Don't leave here today. It's time that we, you and I, say, God, I want to be with you. I want to be right with you. I want to get right today. So if you want to pray, come on. We're going to sing one little thing right here, and then we're out of here because this is so important. I am chosen. I'm not forsaken because I am who God says I am, not necessarily who the lawyers or the doctors said. It says that he's for me, he's not against me, because we are who he says we are, and we're fearfully and wonderfully made. Sing that with me. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. You are for me, not against me. I am who you say I am. You need to say it. I am chosen, not forsaken. I am who you say I am. It's not a mistake you're here today. He's for me. He's not against me. I am who you say I am. Oh, I am who you say I am. Whom the sun sets free. Sing it loud. Oh, he's free indeed. I'm a child of God. Yes, I am. You're dismissed. God bless you. Thank you for being here. Hey, let's thank Howie And he's going to have to go, but we're ready. We're going to spend time up here if you want to come pray.